Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan, and I'm the Development and Partnerships Associate here at CAAM. Thank you for joining us for the Life Interrupted Shorts program. Before we begin, I just wanted to give a warm thank you to our co-presenters for this program, the API Council, the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, and Singapore Connect. Also, I do want to thank all of you for watching, all of our members and our donors for supporting CAAM and CAAMFest 2021. If you would like to learn more or support bringing Asian and Asian American stories to light, please visit us at caamedia.org. We're really excited to have all of the filmmakers from each of the shorts you saw here with us today. We'll be talking with them one by one. And so for the first one for today, I want to invite Diana Dai of COVID and Who I Am.
Hey, Jonathan. Hi.
Thank you again for sharing your film. You know, as an Asian American, it's always striking learning about the parallels in Canadian culture and history. You know, I'm curious, how did you come across, Mary and Frank's story and develop this film together?
Well, during the early, when COVID started, there's a lot of news because people call the virus the Chinese virus and the Wuhan virus. People, Asians in Canada, I'm sure in the United States, around the world, and start to become a subject of a racist attack. So I, as a Chinese Canadian filmmaker, I really feel strong. Like I need to bring this story to the audience, especially to the local audience, non-Asian audience, let them know like what we have been through. That's why, I started looking, and back then there was Canadian Broadcast Corporation, CBC, and they were just commissioned some short stories because during the COVID, difficult to do the, making film. So I thought, oh, that's a great chance. Yeah, I should grab it. And then because, my experience, my background, so CBC, oh, that's a great subject. And, she will tell our story about the Asian Canadian. That's how I start to, looking for the subject. And the one thing actually, I can't say, maybe culture things. I mean, a lot of Asians, they don't want to really tell the stories in the beginning of a virus. I mean, they're scared. They're scared to be a victim again if they tell their stories. Yeah. So luckily, I find one, a young Chinese Canadian, and she's brave enough to tell her story.
What was the process like of looking for, someone willing to share their story? It's interesting that you bring up kind of that reticence, right? That hesitance of people wanting to speak out. Like,
yeah, it took me a long time to find the subject. The process, even Mary was in the beginning, she was a little bit hesitant. Because, like I mentioned, is really afraid if people, because on CBC, and so a lot of people see her story, and she's kind of a bit reserved. But I told her, I said, if we don't tell our stories, like how would other people know what we have been through? I tell her my story, like I've been, an immigrant from China. It's for me, like I have to work twice hard as locals in order to be accepted by locals. We really need to voice our concerns, and this is not a small thing. This is a big thing, and especially, and eventually she said yes, because when I really found it, the impact of those racism and anti-Asian racism is really more significant on the young kids, because they start to doubt their, identity. Who I am? Am I Chinese? Am I Canadian? And those people who were born, and Mary was come here only like 3-4 years old, and English is the only language she speaks. She said, I eat same food, speak same language, and she said, I always think I'm Canadian. I don't really think about. I did not think I'm Chinese, because if I think I'm Chinese, my Chinese part of me, and then I'm not Canadian enough. I will not be accepted by locals. So she's always thinking I'm Canadian. But then after what happened, and she said, I have to face reality, because I may never be accepted, by some people in Canada. And also after film came out, and a Korean girl, like the same university, Queen's University in Canada, she said, I walked on same street where Mary walked, and some white guy came to her and started coughing at her face and said, Chinese virus. And she posted on her social medias, she said, I can imagine Mary, what had Mary been through at that moment, because I experienced the same thing on the same location, same street. It's so sad.
Yeah, it really is. And, I feel like your film really resonated with me because similar, background growing up in Texas, and my family actually moved back to China. So, I think being in between those worlds. And so I'm really, grateful that you are sharing this story, and especially with those that might be less familiar with, issues that our communities face. Is there a way that folks watching can follow you and learn more about your work?
Yeah, they can, follow me in the Twitter. So Diana Dye, at Diana Dye 6. So they can follow me on Twitter or Facebook. I give it to you later, but my website. But my website is dianadye.com.
Thank you, Diana. Really appreciate you joining us and chatting.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, we have Shetal Shah with Off Duty.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hey, thanks for joining us on stage.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I feel like your film, it was very hard-hitting and surprising too.
Yes.
Where should we start? Well, I know you mentioned, you're a writer and director, and you actually cast yourself in this. I'm curious about kind of your experience, both being in it and directing it as well.
Sure. So the story in the film is based on something that happened to me, actually, one summer in a post office in Atlanta. And one of the characters, the character that I play, stuck with me and resonated with me after the incident was over. And that's what inspired me to actually write this story and write this film. And as an actor, I wanted to explore her and my feelings about what happened and all of that. And so that's why I wanted to play her. And then as a writer and a director, I just knew that I had to tell this story and get it out there. And so that's how they will come together.
Yeah, I feel like you explored really beautifully kind of how the context and the spaces that we kind of go through and the roles that we play affect how people respond and perceive us.
Exactly.
I'd be curious to hear more about kind of, what you were trying to share about kind of these issues.
Well, you hit it right on the head. Stereotypes, and what we think people are all about as opposed to what they're really all about. So I felt like I wanted to touch on that in the film, especially with the main character. And there is a twist at the end, so I won't give it away. But, just who you think people aren't necessarily who they are, just based on what they look like or other types of, factors. Looks can be deceiving. And so I wanted to kind of turn stereotypes upside down on their head a little bit in the film.
Yeah. Were there any moments that kind of, I guess, in making this film, in researching it, in working on it, anything that you learned or that surprised you?
Lots of things, actually, but the main character is based, well, I should say that there is someone like the main character who actually exists. So in my research, I found her and spoke with her. And so got a lot of insight into what that is like for her on the ground. And it helped to definitely, inform the film. So that was exciting and surprising to find out that, you know what, there is actually someone out there, few people out there who this is their life, this is who they are. They exist in the world. So that was really cool.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil anything, but after I saw it, there was actually a viral video that I think I had seen that was similar, and it was just like very shocking, right? That this happens and still happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Did you have any favorite moments from the short?
You know, I have to say that I was really lucky that all the actors were so wonderful. They really made my job easy. And I think the scenes with the police officer, to be honest, as edgy as that is, or as controversial as that may be, I think they really resonated. And of course, the very, very, very last moment with him is one of my favorite moments in the film.
Great. And I have just one last question, but who, I feel like this film speaks to a lot of people, but for you, who are you trying to kind of share this film for?
It's a good question. If I'm really being honest, I was trying to share this film for the character that I play, the homeless woman. Mm-hmm. She really resonated with me, and she stuck with me, and I just wanted to make her, I should say, I wanted to represent her as a human being, and not just a something, but a someone. And I hope that this, in my way, this is how I was able to do it.
Yeah, thank you. And
hopefully
by people watching it, they can also have, more compassion too.
Yeah, I hope so.
Before we go, would you be able to share, how people can follow you and learn more about your work?
Sure, yeah, we have a Facebook page at Off Duty Film. So you can find us there, and we keep ourselves updated about the film and everything that's happening with the film. And thank you for watching, and thanks for having me.
Thanks, Shetal. All right, so moving along, we have Nelson Kim, the director of The Complaint. Thanks for joining us, Nelson.
Hi, Jonathan, and hello, unseen audience.
Yes, wherever you are in the world. So I really loved your short, how bare it was, but also rich, and through that, just how the writing shines. I would love to hear kind of what inspired you to make this film.
Sure. In a word, COVID. The film is very much it's set during the early months of COVID lockdown last spring, 2020, and I teach film to undergraduates for a living, and so while the film isn't directly inspired by, I'm not the professor, and the student's not based on any of my students, but the film is very much about what that time period was like. I think for many of us, and the sort of texture of suddenly all of us being sort of stuck in our homes and only communicating with each other through Zoom. The film, as you've seen by now, was recorded entirely on Zoom. So it was really, among other things, I just wanted to sort of capture what that atmosphere was like in those crazy first few months. And also, some of the things that sort of came up during that time involving sort of, the way different people had different burdens to bear during that time, and how, certain people just had a much heavier load to carry than others, and sort of, how we all try to deal with each other's needs for sympathy, for compassion, while also dealing with our own needs as well.
Yeah, I feel I was deeply moved by it, because it like you said, it was just, that was last year for me in a lot of ways. Like all the extra minutes just thinking about how should I reword this just to be mindful of where someone else might be at.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff that comes up a lot of the time in my job as a teacher, but I think the pandemic sort of intensified everything, from sort of inequities, or individual people's struggles, and the sort of it kind of put everything under a much more intense microscope.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, this was shot on Zoom. I'd be curious to hear about what were the limitations of shooting on Zoom, but also like, were there any ways in which it kind of like helped your filmmaking
Yeah,
also more
you
that you're
know,
excited about?
I turned to making a movie on Zoom out of desperation because I just really wanted to make something. I hadn't directed anything in a couple of years, so I was just really itching to make something. And then of course COVID hit, and I thought, oh well, I'm not going to get to direct a movie for quite some time apparently. But then I came up with the idea for this, and so Zoom seemed like, you know, it was the obvious medium for this particular story. But it was also the only way that that I could make a movie last spring. But it actually ended up being very liberating in a way, because there's so much of the sort of economic and sort of logistical and mechanical apparatus of filmmaking that I didn't have to worry about, whether that was, you know, financing, equipment, personnel, et cetera. It was really just me and my actors, and that was pretty much it. So that was actually really freeing. You know, most directors know what it's like. Like, you spend much less time actually directing than you do trying to raise money, trying to put the crew together, trying to get the movie out there, et cetera. So it was really nice to have that ratio reversed. Although I hope I never have to make another movie on Zoom ever again. So.
Oh, well, you know, we have this new art form, so but
Right.
yeah, I totally get what you mean there. Yeah, I'm curious, like, what is it like directing on Zoom? Like, you're not on set with actors, right?
Yeah, although, you know, I got to say, like, I mean, by the time we shot the movie last August, so by that time I'd already put in like 3 or 4 months of teaching on Zoom. So it felt very familiar to me. I mean, you know, initially it was, you know, like, yes, we're not all in the same room together, but I can still see them. They can see each other. The communication was fine. So rehearsing wasn't really a problem. So.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
And one last quick question before we wrap up. I'm curious, you know, since you are a professor, did filming this movie kind of affect the way you approach your teaching at all?
I'd like to say it made me a better person, but you know, honestly, I can't say I did. I mean, I did. I was trying, like I said, I was trying to address some of the issues that come up in my teaching, but hopefully, I was already trying to handle those issues in a compassionate way and an intelligent way before making the movie. So I can't. I don't know if there's any way that I can say that it definitively affected how I teach.
Yeah, I mean, I think the film as a whole definitely reflected, like, clearly showed that you had been reflecting on these things.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. But yeah, I would love if you can share ways people can follow you. And
sure, yeah. My Instagram is the Lower Freaks. That's FREQS. Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention in time to make the caption, but you can also follow me on Vimeo. It's just vimeo.com/Nelson Kim. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Nelson.
Thank you, and thanks to CAAM, and thank you for watching.
All right. So now we have Saleem Reshamwala, who brought us Van Sanctuary.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, Saleem. Appreciate you joining. I love kind of both the premise of this and kind of the fun throughout the film, as well as, you know, without spoiling, some unexpected, you know, moments. You know, I'd be curious, kind of like, how did you land on this story? It's such a kind of interesting premise.
Yeah, it really came through a couple things. One, you know, in my own extended family, the issue of documented or undocumented is like a very real issue that folks are facing. And I've thought a lot about how thin that line is between who has the papers to be in a country and is allowed in a place and who isn't. And I'm also constantly surprised by the many different kinds of biases we have, aside from the obvious ones we might think we have. You know, the assumptions that people of color often make about other groups, other people of color, and then the other limitation, of course, was COVID. You know, and so I took kind of a different approach from the speaker mentioned, kind of shooting everything through Zoom. The only other option really was shooting everything really far away from each other and outside. So we did a full crew shoot, and there's never a moment where anyone is close to each other in that film, and that's because the story had to be written in a way that we could shoot. So it was a situation where we're really writing to the situation.
Interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting seeing the ways in which COVID limitations affect content in the past year, and not just the way we tell stories, but the stories themselves. That was really interesting. Yeah, I'm also curious too, because like I feel like there was a lot of humor in this short. Obviously, you know, the pandemic has been far from it. You know, I'm curious how you view and incorporate, you know, humor in your storytelling.
Yeah, it's super challenging, right? Because, you know, the pandemic, terrible issues, it also unearthed, you know, made even more visible many of the challenges we face as a society. But just like you have laughter and humor and a variety of storytelling among folks who are in challenging situations, like, you know, undocumented folks are not always sad about their sitting around sad about their documentation status, of course, right? Like it's a very complicated situation, but they're, you know, laughing and enjoying and life and at the full range of humanity. So just like with undocumented folks having the full range of humanity, even during COVID, we're experiencing the full range of humanity. So those things are kind of in the air and in the background. And, you know, you never want to diminish any of those issues, but many kinds of stories can be told with all those different challenging backgrounds happening.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I'm gonna have to like reflect on that statement you said a little more after this. But I did have one last question for you. I guess you kind of touched on a bit, but in what you've said. But I always am curious, you know, who you were writing for or making this film for, and you know.
Yeah, you know, I was really cautious in the process to integrate. I wrote the piece, but I also had input we had story consultants who, you know, were from a few different communities of color and had previously been undocumented themselves. And you know, the thing that we talked about as we were kind of reviewing notes and I was sharing drafts was, there's films that are very important that are getting a message to a very specific audience. And this film, though, I wanted to make it one that we could watch ourselves. And I'm not undocumented myself, but I wanted the people who are to also be able to watch this film. And basically everyone who was a collaborator looked like the mix that's in the film. So I wanted folks who looked like the people in the film to also be able to enjoy it.
Yeah, that's great. That really is. I think something that is always important to, you know, acknowledge is just the way communities of color intersect and how we kind of work together too. So I appreciate that, Saleem. Before we go, could you please share, you know, ways that people can follow you?
Sure. My Instagram and Twitter is kidethnic, DETHNIC. And we'll be sharing we are sharing in the process of sharing a bunch of behind the scenes stuff. And hopefully, hopefully sharing an update on a next step that we've got our fingers crossed around.
Ooh, that's awesome. All right. So go follow Kid Ethnic and we'll see what's coming.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Liam. Hey, and now we have Lana Wynn with Fresh Peaches. Hey, Lana.
Hey.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so this film, you know, I really loved the color and the style of this film. I wanted to ask you, you know, how you landed on 1977 and kind of what informed kind of just how you shot the film.
Yeah, I think 1977 was because I think this film came from like a desire to write a Vietnam War story, but about the immigrants and not about the soldiers and the warfare and all that. And so I think that was like a very natural year to choose, kind of like how, like when everything ended and based off of my parents' experiences as well. So that's kind of why I chose 1977. And yeah, I think obviously I was born in 1999. Like I don't know what the 70s are like. So everything from production design, lighting, and color was just trying to inform that time period best I could.
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned how you kind of were inspired by stories from your parents, and how the film was dedicated for your family. I'm curious, were there, stories, people in your life that you specifically drew from when making this?
I think definitely my grandmother, and I mean, it has a grandmother in the film, and my entire life I grew up hearing about her and how she supported basically my entire family when they came over from Vietnam. But unfortunately, she passed away before I was born. So I had never met her, and in a strange way, I felt like this film was a way for me to not only honor her strength and her struggles, but to kind of communicate with her. So that was really important for me, and I think that even though the premise of the film and the conflict is not based on a real story that I know, definitely based on that character of the grandmother.
Yeah, that is very beautiful. I've been thinking a lot myself recently just about my own family and our history. So I feel like yeah, that's a really great tribute, I think.
Thank you.
Was there anything, you learned about, obviously, you learned about your family history, but was there anything that you kind of learned about yourself and about whether as a filmmaker or personally through this process?
I learned a lot. I mean, I think the most important thing for me was honestly that experience of feeling like I was talking to my grandmother. But it was also the first time that I worked with other Vietnamese people, actors and crew, and that was really important for me. And then I just think that this was my first foray into really trying to understand the Vietnam War. And the biggest thing that I learned was that every Vietnamese person had a different experience. Some were really grateful for the US, some were more critical towards them. And I think in this film, I tried to comment on a couple of those different things, but it's still something that I'm learning about. So this is very much like the beginning of my journey into kind of understanding my history.
Yeah, and hopefully much more to follow. I really loved how it was a difficult situation that happened in the film, but that there was also a lot of joy between the grandmother and grandson and all of that. Did have one last question for you. I'm always curious when talking to creators, like if there were any favorite kind of moments of the short for you, or that just really resonated with you.
Do you mean like in the film or just like during the creation?
Yeah, in the film.
In the film. I don't know. I would have to say maybe the ending, when they're both in the car and the grandson puts the lipstick on the grandmother. I feel like that's a great resolution, but such an intimate moment. And I feel like everything in the film for me was trying to build to that moment. And it's like a moment of peace, even if it's temporary. So probably that moment.
Yeah, a moment of peace. I like that, despite everything that has and can happen. So really appreciate you sharing this film with us, Lana. Are there ways for us to follow you, to learn more about what's coming next?
Yeah, you can follow my Instagram, or I have a website, and yeah, you can just find me there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Lana, and hopefully we'll see you at another CAAMFest.
Thank you so much.
And last, we have Valerie So, who brought us Radical Care, the Auntie Sewing Squad.
Hi.
A great squad name.
And a really wonderful acronym.
Yes.
not intentional. We're
Yeah.
not thinking that far ahead when we form the group, believe me.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like your film is very heartwarming and rich with love and community. I through the pandemic, I feel like my neighborhood block was very, important in kind of having solidarity. So I appreciated, how much that kind of seeped through in your work.
Yeah, and the amazing thing about that particular squad, about the aunties, is it's actually nationwide. and it's all virtual. So none of us really, I mean, a few of us have met each other locally, but for the most part, we're all like hooking up on Facebook. So it was really kind of one of the things that we had to do, right? Because we're all stuck in our houses, we can't travel. But it's turned into this amazingly rich and vibrant and nurturing community that's super helpful for my mental health during lockdown. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw in the film that you were one of the aunties. Did you come across this group first and be part of it, or did the film come first and then?
No. Christina Wong formed this group, the performance artist, just formed a Facebook group back in March 2020 to find if she could get more fabric and elastic. And it wasn't like she wanted to have, like I said, any kind of permanent thing. And I'm a friend with her on Facebook. And so I joined, and then it just kind of like blew up. All of a sudden, there were a whole bunch of people who wanted to sew face masks, not only for themselves, mostly not for themselves, but for people who needed them, because it was super critical, right? The Trump administration had messed things up so badly, and healthcare workers were not getting any PPE. We then pivoted to, helping out Black Lives Matter, undocumented people in prisons, farm workers, a lot of folks who couldn't even afford to, get $2 masks from Old Navy. And we're still making masks. We're still at it because there's still a need. A lot of the folks are still, not able to get proper protection even now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How do you get connected with the groups that you share the masks to?
We have there's a really actually elaborate system of what we call super aunties, who are the ones who kind of vet the organizations, but anybody in the group can propose and ask, but they have to be the point person. So it's really kind of a non-hierarchical system. Even though Christina Wong calls herself the overlord, she's not really in charge. It's like we're all kind of in charge. And that's why when I made the movie, again, the way I sourced all the footage it was all crowdsourced. So I just posted a post on Facebook and said, send me your 30-second clips, horizontal orientation of you sewing, of you cutting stuff up, of talking about why you're in the LT Sewing Squad. And then I edited it all together to the soundtrack from Cronus Quartet, who had reached out to us originally to make the movie. So it's all virtual. It's all whatever you want to do. And, it's driven by the people who are in the group.
I see. Yeah, I feel like in the description you mentioned that it's an experimental documentary. I'm curious, was there anything you kind of like learned or were surprised by through the filmmaking process, either personally or as a filmmaker?
Well, my background is in experimental filmmaking. I only just started making like regular documentaries recently. So like Love Boat Taiwan is the feature that I made last year that was in CAAMFest. But for me, making experimental films is just super freeing because you're not locked into particular filmmaking conventions. And so working with crowdsourced material, working with stuff that was shot remotely and then sent to me via WeTransfer was not that much of a pivot for me, because I feel like it was just like another part of the style that I've been using for a long time. And I really appreciated that I was able to put that to use,
Yeah, it's funny through this whole kind of shorts program conversation, seeing the different ways in which filmmakers have created films in this year.
Yeah.
I wanted to finish with like one quick fun question. I'm curious, do you have a favorite mask that you wear, like your go-to?
I have like 15 or 20 face masks. So I just like, whenever I see an interesting fabric and there's like some left over, and then I'll make myself one. Sometimes they're like test masks. But so like over the winter, I was wearing more like dark blue and reds. And now I'm kind of more into like the spring colors.
Okay.
Who knows what's going to happen over the summer?
Cool.
Yeah,
well,
that's one of the perks of having a lot of fabric lying around your house. Yeah, you don't even want to see how much fabric I have in my house. It's scary.
Just means more masks for people. So, but thank you, Valerie. Really appreciate
we
you
really
us.
we would like to retire sometime soon. So everybody can please get your vaccinations and keep social distancing. That would be great. Yeah.
Yeah. yeah, ideally we run the anti-sewing squad out of business. But thank you again for your time. Is there a way, you know, those watching can follow you and learn more?
Yeah, I've got an Instagram and a Twitter. And then also I have a website, beyondasiaphilia.com, where I write, it's a blog actually. And so I write like longer stuff there, but I'm pretty much all over Twitter and Instagram. So if you want to find me talking in shorter bits, that's the place to go.
Thank you, Valerie, for all you do. And for now, let's bring everyone back on just so we can have everyone on screen. Thanks again, all of you, for being a part of Life Interrupted, the Shorts program, for sharing your work, the many different ways that you highlighted the struggles, the joys of the past year, and the ways that you created beautiful work from this. I guess we're gonna do like a group bye to those watching. So I guess we can wave. And
Bye.
so I'll be
Bye.
Bye,
everybody.
Thank you for watching.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching,
Thank
and
you.
we enjoy the rest of CAAMFest 2021.